My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Are negative Google reviews hurting your business? Don't let unfair feedback cost you customers. At Webamax, we specialize in removing false, misleading, and damaging reviews so your online reputation stays strong. Our expert team works quickly and legally to clean up your digital presence, helping you rebuild trust. Visit us on the web at www.gowebamax.com. That's GOWEBIMAX.com, or text us for a free quote at 856-840-8343. Don't let bad reviews define you. Get immediate help from Webamax.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free second look review. Second look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Hey everybody, it's Weird Islanders, the podcast, back once again. My name is Dan. That is Mike. How are you today, Mike?
I'm doing wonderful. The Islanders, as we record this, are I think this is the first episode now that we've really recorded mid-season.
Yeah.
Of these, usually we record as many as we can in the summer months while we have more time, and we are recording this on the heels of the Islanders on a disastrous 7-game winning streak. So I'm in quite a good mood actually, and
Yeah.
And my mood's only going to get better because we have a really fun episode that is something that I literally would do, even if it was just you and me or whoever, myself in a dark room, just saying a bunch of names out loud. And it was a great idea that came from you. Yeah, I'm really ready to sink our teeth into this one.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that even if we didn't have the podcast and we were just friends talking, we would 100% do this.
Right.
Right. And so this is going to be a bit of a different episode for us. First of all, it's just Mike and I, no special guests today. We'll get back to the special guest shortly enough. Again, like Mike said, we have a ton recorded from earlier in the season and over the summer still too to go. But we wanted to do something in the style of something the NHL just did, which was their quarter century teams. So every team got a quarter century team that was the best. They had a first team and a second team. We talked about the best players over the last 25 years. It's crazy to think that the year 2000 was 25 years ago, because to me it feels like yesterday. But it was a cool exercise. Some teams I thought like their quarter century team was basically just their current team with a couple of extra guys on it. So like the Rangers quarter century team was basically the current Rangers with I think Ryan McDonough and Henrik Lundqvist. They were the only two guys that were on there that weren't currently playing for the Rangers. The Islanders team I thought was pretty interesting. No real surprises here. You've already seen this, I'm sure, but their first team was John Tavares, obviously, Brock Nelson, Josh Bailey, Nick Leddy, Adam Pelech, Ilya Sorokin. And then their second team was Matt Barzal, Anders Lee, Franz Nielsen, Kenny Janssen, representing the earlier part of the century, Ryan Pulock, and Semyon Varlamov. Before we get to the idea for this particular episode of Weird Islanders, the podcast, what do you think of this project that the NHL did and the Islanders quarter century team overall? Again, no real surprises. Maybe you can make an argument for a couple of guys here and there. Janssen being there, I think, is cool. A cool nod to the earlier teams, but I don't know. For me, Kenny Janssen is more of a '90s kind of guy, and I would have maybe put Michael Pekka or Yashin or Adrian Aucoin in that spot. But otherwise, I thought they did a pretty good job picking these guys. Sucks seeing Tavares there, but I mean, what are you going to do? But what'd you make of this whole project and the Islanders end of it?
Well, I thought of the project. I thought it was funny that they just were like, "Oh, by the way, we're doing this. Here's like the Minnesota Wild team." And you're like, "What?
Right.
Where did this come from?" Well, because on one day I just woke up and there was like a NHL quarter century team on my timeline,
Right.
and I was like, "Oh, maybe it's like their 25th anniversary." And then I saw, "Oh no, they're doing one for all 32
Yeah.
teams." It was just classic NHL.
Right.
But yeah, I know I didn't really have any problems with it, one way or another. I was hoping that I'm guessing like there was a committee or something. Maybe they reached out to some beat writers or whatever, and I was hoping that there would be more spite and maybe Tavares just like wouldn't get on. I know he should be on it, but that was just my hope, was that there would be like a spite ad where he wouldn't be it. But yeah, I didn't really have much of a problem. I understand like people want Boychuk in there, and but that's why we have a show like this to pay homage to those kind of guys that maybe don't get the recognition from the NHL on a quarter century team. So we have our own. I think this one maybe carries more weight.
I think so too. My favorite quarter century team, by the way, that the NHL did was the Seattle Kraken's quarter century team, the team that is not even 5 years old. This is literally just the guys that are playing for Seattle right now. And looking at the Canucks quarter century team, if I was a Canucks fan, I would just be in literal tears looking at all these guys, how they all left under contentious circumstances one way or another. But no, it was a cool project. And yeah, like you said, one day they just started showing up and you're just like, oh, we're doing this? And I don't know. It was very weird, very NHL the way it got rolled out. But I thought it was pretty well done. And of course, that gave us the idea. I'm sure other people thought of this too. I feel like I got some messages about this, so I can't take all the credit. But we decided to do an all Weird Islanders quarter century team. As you know, we have plenty of Weird Islanders to go. We have a huge list. And I think some of the guys that we would put on our quarter century Weird Islanders list are guys maybe we've done before. Maybe they're guys that haven't gotten episodes yet that might get episodes in the future. I know mine personally is a mix. And this was just a natural fit for us. And when I proposed this to you, it was like, yeah, let's do this. And of course, we have time now to do it. And this is one of the very rare sort of quick turnaround episodes of Weird Islanders because it kind of came about pretty quickly. But again, this just makes too much sense to not do it. And so I'm going to start with you. I want to hear your team. There might be some crossover between the two of us. We each did one team, so there might be a little bit of crossover here. But I'm curious to hear your methodology and of course the guys you picked. So well, first of all, let's go. What method did you use to pick these guys? Was it just straight up, I mean, the best of the weirdest, or is there something else going on that made you make these selections?
I would say I don't really have a methodology to it. This is just I was kind of parsing through the seasons from the past quarter century and looking at the names and thinking, okay, which guys kind of evoke the biggest response out of me. So it's very unscientific and very subjective and individualistic, but that's really all I did. I didn't go into it thinking they had to have had like a positive impact on the team or anything like that. I just went into it thinking, the guys that kind of evoked that response, and that's how I came up with my list. I did try to steer away from guys who we've done episodes on before. I have a couple that like are in like the honorable mentions, but So I did have that kind of weigh in on me a little bit, but yeah, that's really it.
All right. Well, as usual, I definitely overthought my list, so I'm interested to hear.
Oh,
Your list.
that doesn't mean I didn't overthink it. Trust me, I overthought it. It's just I didn't have there was no calculus involved.
Gotcha. All right, that makes sense.
Yeah, I would say that if I had some calculus involved, it might have been I would have probably thought about it a lot less, but
Right.
it would have made the job easier, but I didn't. So
Right. I mean, as if it's not been made abundantly clear by now, 60 whatever episodes into this series, we could talk about these guys all day. So, overthinking is going to come with the territory, I guess. But this was a fun exercise for sure. Okay, so where do you want to start? Do you want to start in the back end goalie defense, or you want to start up front with your forward?
let's go with we'll go with the forwards.
Okay.
First. And we should note we haven't discussed any of this
No. Nope.
beforehand. And I didn't think about that going in. Like, okay, do I think try to get into your head and be like, is not that this guy's on my list, but like, oh, if I put Matthew Spiller on my list, like, what are the chances that Dan has Matthew Spiller, and then do I want that to happen? And but I didn't really consider that at all.
Yeah.
So but we'll start with the forwards, and we'll start with let's start down the middle. We'll go with the guy who's going to anchor my line here, and that's Travis Zajac.
Yeah, great pick.
Yeah, so I don't know how you cannot look at the Islanders roster from that shortened season with the magical playoff run and look at it and just not, especially if you're an Islander fan or a Devil fan, and if you just were on their hockey reference page one day and just get down, scroll down the list and just see Travis Zajac's name and just start cracking up. But it's not, and as funny as it was that he was there, and also how appropriate it was that Zajac was on that team, considering Lou and Trotz, and you couldn't have built a better player for Barry Trotz than Travis Zajac. Maybe not Travis Zajac when he was however old he was on that team, in his late 30s, but in terms of his career, like, I'm sure Barry Trotz throughout his entire coaching career was like, oh God, I just wish I had a guy like I wish I had 20 Travis Zajacs on my roster, right? But he comes over as the throw-in, almost like it was almost like the Devils were doing him a favor.
Yeah.
To come over, and when they were like, hey, yeah, we got the first round pick for Palmieri, that's great, but Zajac, we think it's towards the end of his career. We don't want to, we don't want him to play out the string for like what could be the last of a very, very good NHL career. I mean, Travis Zajac, I think it's forgotten how good this guy was when he was going.
Yeah.
He was kind of like a Patrice Bergeron light, maybe you could say.
He was like just sort of below, like if you think about the top tier defensive centers in the league, he wasn't like a Patrice Bergeron or any of those types of guys, but he was like one tier below those guys, and still very good.
Right. Yeah. And was playing on the perfect team for that kind of style. He wouldn't score like the lights out, but he'd always be around like between like high 40s and 60 points when he was good. The Devils were good when he was there. And I feel like he always scored against the Islanders. And then, he comes over and he scored a massive goal for the Islanders too. And I think that's why when I was going over this list, I just thought about it. I'm like, oh man, I played that goal over my head against the Bruins in Game 6, where he just cleans up in front of the net, scores, and there's Travis Zajac celebrating a goal with Kyle Palmieri and wearing New York Islanders. Like, Andy Green's there. It's just it was such a nice moment. So Travis Zajac is he's a very deserving member, I think, of my team.
100%, absolutely. Okay, so he's your center. So who do we have on either of the two wings?
So
for the York
flanking Travis Zajac is we'll go dial it back to the early 2000s, and a guy that he has a very specific. I have a very specific connection with this player. We talk a lot, especially on this show, about how back in this era, the dead puck era, into like the early salary cap era, when the NHL was just like straight up in the wilderness. You couldn't find NHL news. You couldn't find NHL highlights. If you weren't watching the game on Fox Sports New York, like it would be really hard to know if the Islanders won or not that night. Maybe you like subscribe to one of those really early text services where they'd send you the scores to your phone or whatever. But it was not it was really hard. But this guy, this player came to the Islanders in a trade in 2002-03. Played just under 100 games. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt here because he is a very weird Islander. That's Jason Wiemer.
Wow.
Yeah. Jason Wiemer came over. He came over to the Islanders in a trade. And I remember when they traded for him being like, why isn't this a bigger deal? Like, why aren't people making a bigger deal about this trade? I think he came for a draft pick right in the middle of the season from or no, maybe he signed with them before the 2002-2003 season, whatever it was. When Wiemer came over, I was like, this is going to be he was a waiver claim.
Yeah, I was going to say
right. Yeah, waiver claim, and I was
he was traded by the Panthers to the Islanders for Branislav Mezzi. And then he left via
waivers. Right. Gotcha. So yeah, so he comes over to the Islanders in a trade, and before the 02-03 season, and I just remember whatever season it was, I just remember being like, this guy should be a bigger deal, like, but it's like a little when you think about the way a page is laid out in a newspaper, it's like one of the sidebars, like Islanders acquire veteran Wiemer, and that was really all you heard about it until the season started when they started training camp that year, and he was pretty good that first year. And I just really liked him because it was one of the I had so much momentum from that previous season. And he was a player that they acquired, a new player. They didn't really acquire too many new players for that roster going into the new year. And I don't know, I had a very weird connection with Jason Wiemer as an early guy that the Islanders traded for to consolidate that season. So yeah, Jason Wiemer.
Mayer wins the draw. Back to Patrick. Patrick slips it up on the wing to Verada. He can't get away from Hammerlick, and now we've got another fight going. Back at the other side of the ice. And it didn't take long. You know that Bolton's going to be involved, and it's against Jason Wiemer. Wiemer and Bolton. Wiemer has Bolton pinned up against the boards, and the linesmen are standing back, and I don't know if they're going to get in here or not. Bolton and Wiemer want to get at it again. Bolton has had several altercations here tonight. And he's trying to get a punch in, and so is Wiemer, and it's not working out too well. And Wiemer got a couple over the top, but that's going to be the linesman will get in there.
That's a great pick. Yeah, 94 games, 10 goals, 22 assists with the Islanders, 140 penalty minutes. I think that's an important aspect of this because I remember, obviously I'm older than you are. I remember Mike Milbury wanting Jason Wiemer for years. And I feel like, I'm not even making this up. Like, I feel like it was there was Jason Wiemer and Jason Widmer. And I'm almost certain it was Wiemer that was the one that Milbury was always after. So Wiemer broke into the league with Tampa Bay, played with Calgary for a number of years, played one season in Florida, and then came to the Islanders. And I'm almost certain that Milbury was on Wiemer from when he was with the Lightning. And he, in his third year, he had 9 goals and 134 penalty minutes. Like, again, this was 96, 97. You could still be that type of player. Like Rick Tocchet was still kind of, the prototype guy who could score and hit and fight and whatever. And like Wiemer could hit and fight, but he couldn't score like Rick Tocchet. And, his highest goal total was 12 between Tampa Bay and Calgary that one year he got traded. So this was sort of a prototypical Mike Milbury player in that he could fight. He liked to fight. He wanted to fight, but he barely scored. And Milbury tried for years to get him, finally got him for one of the high draft picks that, that Islanders team had that didn't pan out. And when he got here, it was I was like, okay, this is the guy that he's been tied to the Islanders for so long. Let's see how this works out. And he just kind of came and went.
Yeah.
Like that 94 games if you had told me it was 9 games, I would have believed you. Like
Right.
that's the impact that this guy made on two very, well, by then they were okay, but he did not have the impact I think Mike Milbury thought he was
Right.
going to have.
Yeah, and that first season, he was like, I wouldn't say he was impactful, but he played a role. And then, like you said, he kind of just disappeared, which was a part
Right.
of the NHL back then, which was now when a team waives a certain player that you've never heard of in your life, you're like, oh, I know why they did that because they got to do this with the salary cap and this
Right.
happens. And back then it's just Jason Weimer's not on the team anymore. And yeah, so
Yeah.
Weimer,
He did play 81 games that first year.
Yeah. No, I liked him. I remember liking him because he felt like a Steve Webb kind of. Oh, Steve Webb's going to pass the torch to Jason Weimer, and so it was a fun season. I do see a Jason Weimer jersey every now and then at the Coliseum, or not the Coliseum anymore, but UBS. Yeah. I would say I haven't seen it in a couple of years, but there's one out there in the wild that will show up to games every once in a while. So
that's amazing.
It's very important to keep that in mind,
right?
As we go on. So, yeah, and I do understand. I'm building a forward core. I'm not really. I'm very positionally agnostic building this. So I have another center. It's like the Islanders. We have a lot of centers.
I was gonna say,
yeah, it's like Cizikas, Pajot playing. But I couldn't leave this guy off because I think when he was on the Islanders, was maybe the best player in the NHL. I'm not even kidding. Like this guy, we watched this guy play. Like, how is this guy not Hall of Famer? He was just an unbelievably, and it was a fun season too, so that helps build up his reputation among us. Kind of did the tour a little bit. Had the reputation of like a Alex Barré-Boulet type guy, or who's the
Nicholas
other guy?
Aubé-Kubel.
Nicholas Aubé-Kubel, correct? Right? Yeah, those guys who, if your team doesn't pick this guy up off waivers, your GM should be sent to a gulag or whatever. But this is a waiver claim after training camp for the shortened season that Garceau got picked up, and the Islanders made the playoffs that year. This guy helped quite a bit, I think, and was really good I thought it was really good in the playoffs. And that is Keith O'Coin. A very lovable guy.
Yeah.
I think he played Division III college, if I remember correctly from when they picked him up, and did the minor league tour, and was one of the early kind of in-betweeners where people like, someone should take a chance on this guy, and I don't know why he's not sticking. And when he played with the Islanders, you're like, well, makes sense why people thought that way. This guy's been awesome. I remember him playing with like David Ulstrom, and for a little while, the two of them were like, oh man, like Yager Lemieux. So I have all the time in the world for Keith O'Coin, and I don't want to get too deep into him because I do hope one day we can devote more time to him.
Yeah. Definitely a favorite of mine from that season. I'm super excited you picked him. I am shocked to find out that so in 41 games that year, again, it was the half season after the lockout. I am shocked to find out that he only had 6 goals, 6 assists for 12 points.
No,
like you said, I could have thought he was Adam Oates that season. Like
he was a point per game player in my mind. I was like, every game the Islanders played, it was like O'Coin had an assist, and the Islanders won.
How is that even possible that he didn't have points in 2/3 of those games or 3/4 of those games? That's unbelievable. But then you scroll down, I'm on Hockey Reference, you scroll down and you realize that his possession metrics, he was like almost a 53% Corsi player, which means he was on the ice for that many shots for. And then you're like, oh, that's why. Because he just constantly had the puck and was constantly in the other team's zone. And that's what made him seem like such an important player. But yeah, I'm with you. We should definitely do an episode on Keith O'Coin at some point. I mean, he is actually a scout right now for the Avalanche, if I'm not mistaken. And it'd be great if we actually could have him on. But he's a guy they picked up for nothing. Again, like you said, that first, they came back and they needed all these dudes. That's where Thomas Hickey came from, and a whole bunch of other guys showed up. And it was like, oh, all right, well, let's see what happens here. And then by the time the playoffs happened that year, this guy to me was an indispensable Islander. Like and the fact that they let him go at the end of the year is still unfathomable to me.
It's because he. I'm trying to think if, I mean, obviously the answer is Tavares, but that that team in the playoffs, so that great 6-game series against the Penguins, Tavares was really good. Oposo was really
Yeah.
good. Streit was really good. Then it might have been O'Coin. Like, he was so good
Right.
on that third line.
Yeah.
And I remember them talking about him on the broadcast a little bit too,
Mm.
being like, "This guy's really made a difference for the Islanders."
Mm.
He had 3 points that playoff series,
Yes.
so him and David Ahlstrom and
Mm.
whoever else was playing on the third line. I think Jesse Joensuu might have got a game in
Yeah.
that playoff series. So like it wasn't like this that team was something else, man.
Yeah.
And um
The guy I always think about on that team, Colin McDonald. Who
McDonald,
played way
yeah.
too many games for us to talk about in this show, but
Right.
he was a machine that season, as far as I remember. So
Yeah,
but,
he was. And
yeah.
he was like playing first line minutes. And
Yes.
yeah. Jesse Joensuu did play in a playoff game in that series. So that was some season. And
Yeah.
so yeah, the good old Weimer Zajac O'Coin line. The
Wow, that's really something there. By the way, that's the first of what will be 2 Jesse Joensuu references on this episode. I'm just teasing that right now. But yeah, Zajac, Weimer, O'Coin is some first line. I'm really interested to hear who you have playing defense behind them, because so far we're off to a gangbuster start.
Yep. So I took 2 guys from the same era. We'll start with one who I was talking about, not necessarily picking the best players or like the most impactful players. But this player, he was in 06-07, was an incredibly impactful player on the blue line. One season wonder for them. We've said this about a few guys on the current team. I just never could imagine this guy ever playing for the Islanders when he was not on the Islanders or before the Islanders. And then he came and I was like, wow, this guy is really good. And I understand why the Islanders signed him, and I hope he's here for a long time. Unfortunately, he wasn't. That's Tom Poti. 44 points in 78 games.
Wow.
In 06-07 for the Islanders. Played he averaged 25 minutes, 43 seconds on the ice. Almost 26 minutes a game.
That's amazing.
For that team that, of course, went on that great run. We talk about this season quite a bit. And was just, he was like pound for pound one of the best Islander free agent signings ever.
Yeah.
Or
for sure.
Salary cap era.
Yeah. And like, how often does a guy sign and then immediately become a workhorse? Like, it's crazy.
It's happening right now.
I know. It's funny. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. He averaged 25-43, almost 26 minutes a game. That was his average, which means he played more than that a bunch of times, like,
right.
That's crazy. And again, just like with O'Coin, it didn't occur to me that he had scored that little because he seems so indispensable. I did not think of Tom Poti as a high scoring player, but 44 points in 78 games is pretty friggin' good from a defenseman. Like, that's crazy.
And the reason obviously why I was talking about I could never imagine him on this team was, if you remember Poti's career, you would know that the seasons before that, the 2 right, or the 3 right before the lockout, and then the 1 after. Stop me if you heard this before, but a decent player became the whipping boy of the New York Rangers fan base for some reason. Like, I mean, this guy couldn't catch a break. He was I understand his numbers kind of dipped for them in his last season, but he was really good for them in some bad years for the Rangers, and all of a sudden the entire fan base decided like he's the one that whose fault it is that they couldn't get beyond the first round in 2006, and it was a really strange thing to have happen, because in my mind I was like, this is a good player, and when the Islanders signed him, it felt a little weird at first, but the fact that he was the whipping boy helped get the Rangers kind of stench off him quicker. And I think if I remember correctly, he was off the blocks really hot that year, just in terms of maybe not his points, but just the way he was playing. He played really well for the Islanders right out of the gates. And he was really good. And it was unfortunate that he only lasted 1 year, but he got a good deal, I remember, with the Capitals. And of course, as these things happen, with the hockey gods, he took the delay of game, like puck over glass penalty, and double overtime against the Rangers a few years later in a playoff series that ended up winning the Rangers the series. And you're like,
Yeah,
well, of course. So
Yeah, Pody is again the first of what will be two players that went from the Islanders and then played for years with the Capitals. Like I think most people probably think of Pody as a Capital at this point because he ended up spending the last 5 years of his career there. So yeah, no, really good player that again is hard to remember was an Islander. The other surprising thing about Tom Pody, as I am on his Hockey Reference page, is that his full name is Thomas Emilio Pody. That's amazing. Does not look like an Emilio to me, but that's pretty cool. He's another guy I would love to get on and talk about. And the guy I had penciled on, and if anybody has any contact information, please pass it along. I thought it'd be cool to have Billy Jaffe come on and talk a little about Tom Pody because he was during that era, obviously. So we'll reserve a longer Tom Pody discussion at some point, but great pick. And I know a favorite of yours as well. I should have known that was coming. To be honest with you, I should have seen that coming a mile away because you love talking about Tom Pody.
Yeah, and like I said, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he was the Ranger fan base.
Yeah.
When they circle the wagons around a player, it just becomes hilarious because you try to make sense of it. You're like, this guy's good. I don't understand why they're mad at this guy, and just doesn't. Yeah, so it doesn't really make sense. But yep. So that brings us to our other defenseman. Yeah, a very different career, both in terms of the type of player he was, the amount of NHL games he's played, where he comes from, his reputation. I think what he's doing now is probably very different from what Tom Pody's doing. So that is one of my favorites ever growing up. A guy who has his jersey hanging up in a deli somewhere in Massapequa. If that deli's still open, I hope it is. I believe it's in Massapequa, and it is none other than Sven Butenschan.
That's right.
78 games played for the 78 games played for the New York Islanders. 1 goal scored. I was in the building for that goal. I was against.
No wonder he's one of your favorites.
Yeah, it was the Islanders got killed, and me and my friends were huge Butenschan fans, and so we were sitting amongst Canadian fans, and Butenschan scored from the point with the Islanders down 5 or 6-0, and we were going crazy.
So a minute and a half into the third period, the Islanders have hit a post. Yanni Ninnema comes back with icing having been waved off, and Matthew Barnaby took a spill. Unpressured, he just lost an edge. Back the other way comes Ronning for the Islanders. Ronning goes wide, throws one right through the slot. Tchaikovsky goes to the corner, where he's hit by Malakov. Ronning took a hit, but got the puck to Butenschan for a shot. He scores! Dunham flubbed it, and the Islanders are halfway there. It's now 6-3 Rangers.
Now you have to wonder what's going through Mike Dunham's mind. I mean, take a 3-goal lead in the third period, you think things are still safe. They're not. That's a good play by Cliff Ronning to take Simon out of the play. And this was a fluttering shot that just goes through the pads of Dunham. And now if you're the Islanders, you say, hey, we got a little something going here. Keep throwing the puck at the net. That's one Dunham should have had.
Sven Butenschan's last National Hockey League goal came almost 3 years ago on the 7th of April, 2001. He was playing with the Edmonton Oilers at the time and scored against Vancouver. That is his only previous National Hockey League goal.
We're like, oh my God, this is so great. And the people in front of us in these very thick Francophone accents were like, we've been trying to figure out why you like him. And I know that sounds more like Count Dracula than French Canadian, but they're like, is he your dad? We never heard of this guy before. We're like, no, we just love Butenschan. He's just like, our guy, big Sven. He was a big dude.
Yes.
Him and Thomas Hickey belonged to a very special club that they wore 3 different jerseys for the Islanders.
Yes.
Butenschan wore 52, and he also wore, I believe, 44 and 64 or something like that.
Yes.
And
three totally normal numbers to wear for
yeah.
44 is not bad, but that's weird.
So good. And he's now head coach of the University of British Columbia's hockey team.
That's incredible.
With and he's got an unbelievable beard. So
Yeah. I was
Sven
going to say,
Butenschoen.
when I think of Sven Butenschoen, the first thing I think of is one of the worst beards in the history of the New York Islanders. He had like the I don't know what you even call it. Like it was a goatee, but it was like just on the tip of his chin. And it made him look
Yes.
like he had a triangular head. And I don't remember think he did, but it made his chin look like it came to like a point, almost like a cartoon character. And unfortunately, that is my lasting memory of Sven Butenschoen. Was a huge guy, 6'4". He was a big guy. And what's also amazing about him is that for a guy who only had 2 goals in 140 NHL games, he played for a lot of teams. He started with Pittsburgh. He played in Edmonton. He ended up on the Islanders, and then he ended up in Vancouver for his final 8 games of his career. But yeah, I think Sven Butenschoen is one of those guys where if you had him on your team, you couldn't help but to like him. Right. Like whether it was his name or his look or the way he played, like he was just one of those guys that just elicited this immediate connection. And if you didn't have him on your team, you're like, who the hell is this guy? It's like one of those. It's feast or famine basically for him.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I've never heard of this guy.
Right.
Just it's so good. But he deserves an episode. And now that I think about it, he's like a coach in a college team. We might be able to get his contact information.
I would think so. He's got some stories.
Yeah,
all,
exactly.
How'd you end up with 3 different numbers?
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
I think that's one for us to go after. Now that
Definitely.
now that we've broken the glass ceiling with Darren Quint,
yeah,
we can really aim high,
right,
and start bringing some luminaries on like Sven Butenschoen.
Definitely. I also love guys that were traded for picks for rounds that don't exist anymore. So like he ended up getting traded by the Panthers to the Islanders for a 9th round pick.
Oh my God.
And Juraj Kolnick, another high draft pick that didn't work out. But man, when you get traded for a pick that in a round that doesn't exist anymore, that's great. Also, if you look at Hockey Reference and you go down to similarity scores, the guy right behind him is another Islanders legend, Aris Bermanis, who they might have been on the same team for a while. I don't know, but great pick. That's awesome. Okay. So we got Zajac, Weimer, Aucoin up front, Pody and Butenschoen on the blue line. Who do we have in goal for this, your particular all weird Islanders quarter century team?
Yeah, this was really tough because when you they've had so many weird goalies.
Oh,
yeah. There was a stint, that 2-season stint between 2010 and 2012, those 2 seasons back to back, where the Islanders I think had played 11 goalies. I don't know if they were all different, but just they played 5 one year and 6 the next. So and we've had a lot of episodes about goalies as well, like Joey McDonald. We did Osgood. We've done Evgeny Nabokov as part of the Reluctant Euros. We've done Luongo. And we did Luongo in weeks together, right? Or was it? Yeah, right. So it's like we've done Robin Leonard. There's been quite a bit of goalies, and so many of them have come in these last 20, 25 years. And when I was thinking of them, I was like, there's got to be one here that would jump off the list to me. And I didn't want to go with Dublowitz because I think it's just too Wade Dublowitz is my guy, but for this sake, we've already given him his time, right. we will continue to do so throughout the history of our podcasting together. So I'm gonna go with Dwayne Rolison. Now he played 2 seasons, but he was under 100 games, and I'm happy to say that he does qualify. And what I love about Dwayne Rolison is I remember exactly where I was when they got him, and I was working at the deli clerk at Associated Supermarket, and I was on my break, my union mandated break, 15 minutes, sitting outside on a curb on right off of Long Beach Road in Rockville Center. And I was just looking at my phone, and I got a text from a friend that the Islanders signed Dwayne Rolison. And I didn't really have much time to digest it. So I just went back, worked the next 4 hours, cutting cold cuts and putting together salads and stuff. And then cleaning the the machines. Just thinking about how this makes any sense. That Dwayne Rollison is now a New York Islander, and just having and he played really well with I think on some bad teams. He was really good, and I think Rolly had a reputation of being kind of a surly sort.
Yes.
So I don't know if he how much he enjoyed playing for these teams, but it did end up with him going to the Lightning and going on a decent playoff run with them. But he was really good with this on some really bad teams, and I liked his setup. He had a cool helmet. I thought very kind of 90s look to him, and so I went Dwayne Rollison, another guy who I not as much as he doesn't belong in the same tier as Nabokov and Osgood in terms of goalies I never thought would ever be New York Islanders because they were just like too good. But he's close, and I enjoyed his very strange, weird time with the New York Islanders.
I mean, on one hand, I'm with you. Like, this is a guy who'd never seemed to really belong on the Islanders. How did he get here? It's crazy. That being said, this guy had a one-of-a-kind NHL career that, like, just, you talk about doing the tour. I mean, I didn't even remember that he started out with Calgary. I remember him from Buffalo. He was the backup on that team that went to the finals that year and lost to Dallas. I think most people probably remember him, kind of gaining a lot of traction with Minnesota,
right?
Where he kind of started to make a name for himself. And then he goes to Edmonton. There's the lockout. The Oilers go on this insane run all the way to the finals. He gets hurt in the first game in a crazy sequence of events. They lose in Game 7 in one of the most absurd Stanley Cup finals ever, played. And then the next year, he leads the league in losses. Like, how did that happen? He lost 34 times in 68 games played. Like, that's crazy. A couple of years after that, they trade him he's a free agent. He signs with the Islanders. And he, again, like you say, he played really well for the Islanders, but that team was really bad. And there are a lot of times he was the only thing keeping them from losing even more. And, they kind of did him a favor and traded him to the Lightning. I remember more him being traded to the Lightning than him coming here. It was just sort of like, oh, okay, I guess Dwayne Rollison's here. I mean, it was like 40. He was 40 years old when he played for the Islanders. I just figured, all right, well, he's just signing on to play somewhere. I remember when they traded him, I was like, man, they could have got some. They ended up getting, what the hell's his name?
Ty Wishart.
Ty Wishart, yeah. I was like, really? That was it? No pick, no nothing? And he was terrific for the Lightning, and then went back to Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Right. They lost to the Bruins in a 1-0 game. That was one of the craziest games I've ever seen. And I kind of felt a little proud of Dwayne Rollison. Like, I was like, this guy's showing he was good this whole year. Just the Islanders were pretty lousy.
And there's actually, once again, another guy who I think will end up getting an episode down the line. And so I'll save some bullets in the chamber. But a guy who, when he was with the Sabres, I remember being like, oh, this guy's been around the league forever, because his name felt very familiar, even though he was like a backup. And so I thought he was like when he went to Minnesota, I was like, this guy's towards the tail end of his career. And then he just kind of stuck around, had those seasons with the Wild. That Oilers team, we've talked about it quite a bit. Like that, he was so good in the playoffs for them. Yeah. Had he stayed healthy, like the Oilers probably win that Stanley Cup against the Hurricanes.
Right.
But he got hurt. Ty Conklin ended up playing because UC Markkanen also got hurt. Like it was an insane Stanley Cup where the Oilers just couldn't catch a break. But that 2005-2006 Oilers team, as we've said, also has so many weird Islanders on it.
Yeah.
And so I should have known from then that Rollison would end up with the Islanders because he was on that Oilers team that just, I mean, I've done it before, but I'll list them again before handing it over for your team of Islander Oiler crossover from that team that went to the Stanley Cup final. Raffi Torres, Steve Stais, Ryan Smith, Marc-Andre Bergeron, Michael Pekka, Marty Riesener, Dick Tarnstrom, Dwayne Rollison, and I believe that is it. But all those guys all ended up with the Islanders at one point or another. And then there are some like former future Islanders. Like I always thought the Islanders were going to end up with what's his face, little guy, Sergei Samsonov. I was like, oh, the Islanders should get this guy on a cheap 1-year deal. So, yeah, I mean, he had a really strange NHL career. Almost that Lightning team too. Like, don't let what you know about the Lightning now be kind of cloud what they were back then. Like they had some good players. Like St. Louis was really good that year, and Stamkos. It was towards the end of Le Cavalier, but outside of that, this wasn't a juggernaut team, and that trade for Dwayne Rollison almost won them a pretty surprising Stanley Cup. So yeah, the Lightning. I'm sure if there was a weird Lightning podcast, they would really, really like to do an episode on Dwayne Rollison, because he came in and did such a good job for them, kind of stabilized that position. I believe it was the other goalie on that team was Mike Smith, but they like traded him, and it was that guy it was Dwayne Rollison and Dan Ellis and Mike Smith. Like those guys were like rotating around, and Rolly came in and really solidified the position. So Dwayne Rollison.
Crazy. Yeah. Yep. He might get an episode of the show.
Yeah, he definitely
at
will.
Some point. But yeah, maybe we'll find some Lightning person to have on and talk about him, because I think that or an Edmonton person. I have a few candidates already. But yeah, no, this is a heck of a team. Zajac, Weimer, O'Coin, Pody, Boutonjean, Rollison. This is the most Michael Leboff team ever assembled, I'm sure. This is pretty great. No, I love it. Yeah, this is a really good team. And again, it's funny because like, it's not an offensive powerhouse, to be sure, but they wouldn't really give up a whole lot of goals, I don't think, either. Between Zajac, O'Coin, Pody, and Boutonjean and Rollison, I think that's pretty good. So you got to hope that Weimer chips in a little bit, sort of just like Mike Milbury. So there you go. Okay, that's great. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll talk about my team. Normally, Weird Islanders has 2 commercial breaks, but we'll just go with one this time, and we'll come back and I'll go through my team, which is way more overthought than yours. So meet us on the other side. Thanks. And now a word from our sponsors. First is always VintageIceHockey.com, where you can get t-shirts, hoodies, jerseys, and more featuring over 100 classic hockey logos. Vintage Ice Hockey now carries a full line of Islanders Anxiety merch featuring our blue and orange brain logo, as well as our Al Arbor and the Island shirts. And as always, our portion of the sales go directly to the Center for Dementia Research. That is VintageIceHockey.com. Try wines from the Pinot Project. They offer a Rosé, a Pinot Grigio, and a Pinot Noir that was named a Top 100 Best Buy by Wine Enthusiast magazine. All are delicious, priced at less than $15 a bottle, and available at local wine shops and at UBS Arena. Learn more at thepinotproject.com. Please drink responsibly.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so it's my turn, and as I've been saying, I way overthought this, and I had a methodology. I didn't want to miss anybody. Now, of course, that's a problem because we're only picking 6 guys, right? So lots of people are going to get missed. So the way I figured I could do this and still kind of get as many people involved as possible was to pick a player from each of what I think are the 5 different eras of this quarter century. Go figure. We've already broken it down to a quarter century, and now I've broken it down further into 5 different eras. And I figured by having one person who represented each of those eras, I can cover the most ground and kind of keep as many people involved as possible. So here are the eras that I have denoted here. So basically you have the Renaissance era from 2001 to the 04 lockout. This is, of course, the Michael Pekka, Alexei Yashin, Chris Osgood, Adrian Aucoin era, where the Islanders came back from the dead thanks to Charles Wong's money and started to make the playoffs and actually be a participant in the NHL as opposed to what they were before that. Part 2 is an era we talk about a lot on this show, the mercenary era. This is probably your favorite. 2005 to 2009. This is when dudes were cycling in, cycling out. Your Victor Kozlovs, your Mike Comries. We've talked about this era a lot, and it's just a lot of dudes coming in, and trying to kind of rebuilding their careers and before they left someplace else. Following that, we have what I'm calling the early rebuild era. The obviously John Tavares rebuild. This would be 2009 when they drafted Tavares to 2013 when they made that playoff run that we talked about before against the Penguins. And that was sort of the delineation point between like, okay, enough rebuilding. Let's try and become a consistent playoff team now, which of course they did not. But that's sort of like, an era unto itself. And then we have the late rebuild period. This would have been 2014 to 2018 when Tavares left. Again, lots of expectations. Didn't meet most of them, but a lot of guys kind of came and went in this era too that I thought was kind of categorized by high draft picks that didn't really work out. We'll get to one in a minute. And that leaves us the final era, which is the modern era or the Lamoriello era from 2018 to the present. This is the one with the John Ledecky and Scott Malkin and their money. And we have, it doesn't seem like it's gone that long, but it's been 7 years and we've had enough weird Islanders. I mean, a lot of our shows are basically guys that are just from this little era. We mentioned one before, Robin Leonard would be one. So with that in mind, I wanted to find a player who represented each of these eras. And again, that to me kind of cast the widest net possible. And I'm actually going to start in goal because I want to get this guy out of the way. If you've listened to this show, we did an episode on him. I talk about him all the time. He's one of my all-time favorites, and he's representing the early rebuild era. It is mi amigo, El Cubano Grande, El Montoya. 51 games played, 18, 16, and 10 for the Islanders. To me, he represents that early rebuild era and the ethos that era had under Garth Snow, which is we've got this guy who's a first overall pick. He's going to be here for a long time, LOL. And we need to surround him with better players. Why not try and find guys who were high draft picks of other teams that hadn't really gotten a chance and give them a chance on this team? If you lived through the Michael Grabner era, you know that, I don't think Matt Molson was a high pick, but he obviously got his chance on the Islanders, made the most of it. P.A. Parento, you know the whole list of guys, basically. Thomas Hickey, again, was in that era. And to me, Montoya is one of those perfect guys. A first-round pick of the Rangers, just at the time when some guy named Henrik Lundqvist was, basically staking his claim to the goal, to their net for the next 20 years, gets traded to Phoenix, can't break through. He's like in the ECHL, I think, at one point, and his GM, Don Maloney, as a favor, sends him to the Islanders because the Islanders needed a goalie, and basically is like, hey, I got this guy. I can't play him. Maybe you could find a spot for him. And for a little while, he looked like he could be the Islanders goalie of the future. And it was just another kind of, first round or high pick that just needed a chance and got it with the Islanders. And he was terrific until he got bowled into by Evander Kane, and it sank his season, the Islanders season in a way, and really put poor Al's career on hold for a while. He ended up in Winnipeg, kind of resurrected himself, and then played with the Panthers for a while. He's, I think, the Dallas Stars community relations director now, trying to get an outdoor game in Mexico City, which would be pretty cool. So yeah, Al Montoya, not a surprise. My pick. I love this guy. We've done a whole episode on him. We don't need to go too deep, but real quick, your thoughts on Al Montoya, one-time reclamation project and just general cool dude.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you were to ask me if my life depended on getting one of your players right, I would have bet I would have gone with Montoya because I know how near and dear to your heart he is. He's a very unique player, and he's unique in ways that you really you attach yourself to. And he had, like I was talking about with Rolison's look, like Al Montoya had a really cool getup, I thought too, with that the helmet, the kind of was it like a werewolf kind of guy on his helmet? It was like some sort of monster, the white pads. And I really think a player who was, as you kind of put it, he was very important for the Islanders. Even like, I wouldn't say it's probably a little hyperbolic and a little Luke Fox jukeboxian to say that his impact is still felt to this day. But it's also not out of the question because I think he came in and was just a kind of a like you said, a project that proved to be a good idea, and the Islanders are like, oh, we can probably do this more with more different types of players, and and yeah, he came in and stabilized things a little bit and set a standard. So Al Montoya, and another guy who I would say is in that heap of players where Like, he just would never have crossed my mind before
Right.
coming to the Islanders as an Islander because of the fight and all that. So
Yeah. I know, one of the rare sort of ex-Rangers that I think is I don't know if beloved is right. He's beloved by me for sure, right? But definitely became a bit of a celebrity with the Islanders, so that's always fun as well. Okay, moving on to the defense, and I'm actually going to start with the second guy that I picked because I believe he was the D partner of one of the guys that you picked, which I think is pretty cool and shows us on the same wavelength here. And that would be representing the mercenary era, John Erskine. Played 34 games with the Islanders, had 1 goal, came over from Dallas with Jesse Yoensu for Yanni Niinema, which is quite a defensive blockbuster trade there. He ended up signing with the Caps as a free agent and played there for 8 seasons. And I remember mostly watching him with the Caps and being like, why on earth did the Islanders ever let this guy go? He's pretty good. Like, he wasn't the flashiest defenseman of all time. Again, he only had 1 goal in 34 games for the Islanders, but he was just a pretty darn good player. And again, he represents that mercenary era where he's a guy who came in for no reason. I mean, this was a trade, not a free agent signing, and just kind of like found a career here and then was just immediately gone almost as quickly as he came. And so I'm almost certain he was either partnered with Tom Poti or they were on the same team together. And it just drove me nuts. I mean, I wouldn't say it haunted me for all those 8 seasons with the Caps, but every time I saw him and he was playing well, I was always like, why is he here? Why didn't he just stay? I don't get, maybe there was something else going on, but John Erskine is almost one of the ones that got away. I know it sounds kind of silly to say that about a guy like John Erskine, who's a totally fine player, but he did sort of haunt me, I guess, for a little while. What memories do you have of Erskine? Am I crazy, or did he play with Poti for a long time?
No, so John Erskine, I'm really glad he's on this team because I've always wanted to do an episode on him. Hope we still can. I was talking about this with Weimer back in the day when you found out about trades. It was really hard, to get information, etc. John Erskine, when the Islanders traded for him, I remember refreshing the page on tsn.ca, which was how you had to do it. And it was right around, like you said, midway through the season. And I immediately went to another place, one of my happy places, which was MikeMusco.com, the Islanders' original message board. I have a MikeMusco.com sweatshirt, which was gifted to me by Maddie the Usher, which I hold very close, and I can't wait for it. I'm really trying to think of the right time to make its debut at a UBS Arena game. But I remember that, and I was so excited about the trade just because it was a trade and trades are exciting, that I became I'm doxing myself here, but I changed my posting name on MikeMusco.com to Erskine44. I think that's whatever number he was, Erskine44. I believe he was. I think he just took the 44 from Niinema. And another fun fact about John Erskine was that the Islanders did that jersey off the back thing. I don't know if they still do it or but they used to just they'd read ticket your seat number out, 301 row 8 seat C or whatever. And I was at the final game of that season, and the person next to me won John Erskine's jersey off his back. So that was really exciting.
That's funny.
And then a guy who, like you said, he went and he became a real servant for the Capitals. Like, he was there for quite a long time. I remember him having some pretty big bouts. I want to say he got into a big fight against the Islanders. I can quickly look it up on Hockey Fights, but I also remember him being a thorn in the side for the Rangers. The Capitals and Rangers had a bunch of battles back then. So, just a guy who I really liked him as an Islander in his short stint, and of course afterwards. And even though he wasn't on the Islanders during those years, I never really hated those Capitals. Oh yeah, he fought Chris Simon. The next year, the season after he left, he fought Chris Simon as a member of the Capitals.
One at the net. Hard carry to the other side. Cody Fan. Here we go. Erskine and Simon. A couple of heavyweights. Simon got the first couple of lefts in. Erskine with a big overhand right is wrestled down by Simon.
First fight of the year for Chris Simon.
I always liked him because I thought he was still playing for the Islanders despite playing for the Capitals.
But see, that's the perfect summary of John Erskine, the player, because he was so solid and so quiet. He could have still been out there, right? And yeah, the Islanders have had a very long succession of guys wearing 44, so there surely could have been a dude out there wearing that number. But you just wouldn't have realized it until you're like, wait, he's playing for the Capitals now. But I just thought he was a solid player again on a team that wasn't really that good. He was on the 06 team, so yeah, he wasn't on the Ryan Smith team. But I just remember thinking, why did they let this guy go? But again, maybe it was something going on behind the scenes. Maybe the Caps gave him a ton of money. Who the hell knows? But I just kind of missed him. I was like, wow, I wish he had stuck around for longer. Okay, his D partner in this scenario represents the Renaissance era, and he's definitely not a guy that people remember from that time, but I kind of do. And it's Ken Sutton. Ken Sutton for a long time played with the Devils, and he was, one of the sort of like faceless drones of the New Jersey Devils. Like you had the Stevenses and the Danicos and the Niedermeyers and the Rafalskis up at the top, and then you had these sort of dudes that would just come up from Albany and just be like hard-hitting, solid defensemen. And like Brad Bombardier was one of them. Ken Sutton was one. I'm sure I'm forgetting. Colin White, I think, was one of them. And Ken Sutton was one of those guys. And all of a sudden, he signs with the Islanders. And I was like, you know what? That might be just the kind of guy they need. Like, he's just a solid defensive player. Ended up playing only 21 games with the Islanders. Had 2 assists, which was shocked to find he had any points at all. And then left to rejoin the Devils, and then left the Devils to play in Germany. So Ken Sutton came and went. Again, a very quiet type of defenseman, but, a big hitter. I don't know if he was an overly big guy, but he sort of played a physical game. And he was a guy I could have swore up and down was going to make an enormous impact on the Islanders just because he was coming from that winning culture in New Jersey. He was a Lou Lamoriello guy, and he didn't really quite have that much import there. But, he represents that Renaissance era because, again, that era was categorized by veteran dudes who had had success and had played a long time in other teams. Even Mark Parrish had a whole career playing for the Panthers before he showed up on the Islanders. And so, forget Osgood, Yash, and Pekka, like all these guys just got here and like kind of melded into one team and played really, really well. And, Sutton is certainly not the most household name of those guys like that, but I felt like he kind of represents the ethos of that team, which is like, yep, we're here now. And so now we've got to become Islanders and make this work. And he was one of those guys. So again, I don't know why he didn't stick around. Maybe he just rather play in New Jersey and then he left for Germany. So I don't know. This is, an important team for you. You were still young at the time. Do you have any recollection of Ken Sutton whatsoever? I don't know if he'll ever get his own episode, but if we ever get Stan Fischler on, I'm going to ask him a lot of questions about Ken Sutton because I feel like he knows him pretty well.
No, it's fun. I don't really have any physical memories of Ken Sutton other than I like that team, as you said, like they were just guys kind of rotating in and out of that 01-02 team, mostly on the blue line. Like you'd get a guy who almost made my list, Darren Van Impe, who was a trade deadline acquisition, but I just knew that these guys were all veteran, like solid, can kind of put your head on the pillow at night and to be dependable on. Ken Sutton in the morning, Kevin Haller kind of guys, like these guys who just were around because the Islanders, they had no young D back then except for Radek Martinek. So it was just this funny mishmash of teams. So that's what I remember about Ken Sutton from that year. At all. And I honestly didn't, like when guys disappeared back then, you just kind of, you're like, oh, that's part of the NHL experience. It's like sometimes you go to you go to turn the game on and the Islanders, like Ken Sutton's just never never plays for the Islanders again, and you don't really find out why because the information never gets to you. So it makes sense, and he's a really good representative of that era for sure.
Yeah, I thought so too, and it just, I don't know. He's kind of a guy. He's on the list. I just don't think anybody remembers him, but I was there. I remember him. I could picture him right now. Okay, so that's the defense in front of Al Montoya with Sutton and Erskine. So we'll move into the forwards, and I will start at center because we already talked about him. I had Travis Zajac on my list too.
There we go.
That's why I laughed so hard before. We don't need to get into Zajac. We just talked about him, but I will say that I will never forget that goal against the Bruins. Never. I will never. I could picture it right now in my head. I will never forget it.
Islanders win the draw. Pageau, a point-a-game player in the playoffs, moves it back for Dobson. His shot patted down by Raz. They score! Travis Zajac on the rebound, and the Islanders are off and running.
J.G. Pageau has had an excellent series on faceoffs. He wins this one cleanly. Get it back. Zajac, now they go to work. Move the puck around. The initial shot comes through, but Rast doesn't see it. Has trouble picking up the rebound, but Zajac doesn't. And is able to slide it in and beat him to the stick side.
And the man that drafted him in New Jersey, the great Louis J. Lamoriello, he's now the general manager of the Islanders. Picked him up at the trade deadline. Pretty savvy.
The feeling of when they scored that goal of being like, they're going to win this game.
Oh,
and they're going to win this series.
Even before he scored it, when he he very calmly corralled the puck because it was right in front of the net.
Right.
And he kind of toe dragged it a little bit so he could lift it.
Yeah.
And time stood still there. I was in the building and I remember just watching him and being able to process who that puck landed on, whose stick that landed on. I'm like, oh, this is a goal. Like, I can start celebrating now because I trust Travis Zajac 1,000,000%.
Right.
To make sure that this chance doesn't go wasted. And it didn't. That was New York Saints Day. He skated to the corner in the big celebration. And it was so weird because you're watching Travis Zajac celebrate a massive, massive, massive goal in the playoffs as a member of the New York Islanders. And it really felt like this, it was always meant to be. Like that moment we were just living our lives building up to that moment. Like it was always going to happen and it did. So we've talked so much about big playoff goals, right? Like Bates and stuff. If we ever do an episode, maybe it's a good idea of just like goals, like this. Like Zajac to me it's up there, which is crazy.
Yeah. Right.
I'll never ever forget like everything about that goal.
Yeah, I try not to get into this kind of stuff, but that felt like real team of destiny shit.
Yeah, it did.
Like Travis Zajac is scoring against the Bruins in Game 6 of a playoff series. That's just you can't lose after that. Like you just can't. Yep. And the Islanders tried. The Bruins got a couple of goals there and made it pretty close, but it eventually they did win, and that was his only goal of that playoff series. He had one assist, and that was about it. But boy, it felt huge. And then I also liked when he did the right thing afterwards, which was he signed with the Devils for one day, retired a Devil, and that was it. And that was to me that was sort of perfect. Like he played there for so long. Got a chance to go deep in the playoffs one more time, played on a heck of a team, and then just went back home and retired and walked off into the sunset. So good on you, Travis Zajac. So we don't need to, we've done the whole thing, but I knew there was going to be some crossover here, and I kind of thought that Zajac might be that guy. I took the chance, but I'm glad we talked about him because I don't know if we can talk about him enough. Okay, that being said, my two wingers though are very different. So he represents the modern era, of course, because, he's a veteran that came over at a draft day deal. And, oh, by the way, he also played for the New Jersey Devils, where, Lou Lamoriello was in charge of for a couple of years there, if you remember. Representing the late rebuild era. We'll have another modern player coming up in a minute, but representing the late rebuild era. This is, again, the era of the Tavares rebuild that had expectations. We wanted this team to keep getting better, keep getting stronger, add more players, go deeper in the playoffs, that sort of thing. Is a guy who is 100% going to get an episode of this show. So we don't need to go that deeply. In fact, we've had a friend who had dibs on this player for a long time. And so I think we might cash in at some point this season still. But that is Josh Ho-Sang, polarizing player to say the least, but when he came here, he had all of the tools and excitement in the world behind him, and he ended up all in total to 53 games played, 7 goals, 17 assists, 24 points. Not a whole lot on paper when you think about it, but from his drafting to all the tools he brought, his life story, such a smart dude and an interesting dude. And I know you felt the same way I did, which is just that we wanted this guy so badly. I don't know if there's been an Islanders draft pick in the last few years that I just wanted to work out so badly that it killed me that it didn't. And it still kind of does in a way. And Josh, again, we won't get too far into it because I know there's a whole episode here for sure. But, he's a guy I think who represents that late rebuild era in the sense that he was a high draft pick, We had a lot of expectations. We thought, we kept trying. They kept trying to make it work, kept trying to make it work. And it just eventually ended up with him on waivers. He played for the Marlies for a little while and then won a championship in the ECHL last year after, I don't know, taking off and having a sabbatical and walkabout in Europe for a while. To me, this is a whole book. Forget about an episode of a podcast. Like there's so much to unpack and under Josh Ho-Sang that we can just go on for a long time. But yeah, he's my my first winger here in my weird Islanders quarter century team.
Yeah, I there's so much to get into, and like you said, like he's like a guy that you wanted to work out so badly because he's such a like a unique talent and so much, and his path was so much fun. Snow making him run the stairs, and Snow's quote when they drafted him. He was like an Islander right away. He felt like an Islander, and he had all the skill in the world. He scored that his first, when he was like, and he was also producing originally. He was like producing at like the clip, an appropriate clip for a player drafted where he was, and it looked promising for him. Yeah. And it spiraled out of control in a very like kind of strange way because it wasn't. It was just like it just wasn't working anymore for anyone, and people tried to make it a bigger deal than it was, and it was weird. And then Ho-Sang was like, "No, I love Lou, and I love the Islanders," and but it was such a strange career, and I have a sneaky suspicion that Josh Ho-Sang is just gonna like end up back with the Islanders in some way, shape, or form. I don't know how. Like honestly, like I don't know what it's gonna be, but I just feel like he's gonna be around here. So that's my hope. So loved that he wore 66 and it pissed off Mario Lemieux.
Yes.
Like that away made him one of my favorite players ever.
Yeah.
Just the consternation about especially with him being such a like a free spirit, and he does he and the game and how often are we told by people in hockey media that we want our players to hockey players are so boring, we need to let them express themselves, etc., etc. And then Josh Ho-Sang picks number 66 and like, whoa, that's a step too far. When we said express yourself, we didn't mean that.
Right.
We didn't.
Yeah.
So it was he's someone who I have all the time in the world for.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of different ways. So I'm happy he's on this list.
Yeah, no, you summed it up. He was an Islander immediately. That they shit on me too. Just the fact that they used a Rangers pick that they got from the Lightning to like get up into the the end of the first round and take them, like just everything surrounding it. Just again, it felt, this is the exact opposite of what I was just talking about with Zajac, where this felt like a team of destiny or a player of destiny thing, and it ended up not working out. Whereas Zajac felt like a team of destiny thing that did, at least for the next round worked out. So yeah, Ho-Sang is definitely going to get his own episode, but I couldn't leave him off this list because he just was important. And I have his number 66 shirt in my my closet somewhere, so gotta represent. Okay, my last player is a guy I think is going to make you laugh, is going to make a few other guys laugh, but another modern era player representing the other side of this sort of era of Islanders hockey, the other side of the coin, the disappointing side of this coin, and that is one Andy Andrioff. Andrioff came as a free agent from the Flyers. You may remember him playing for the Kings. I think he started with the Kings just after they won their cups, but he still had that mentality. He was a grinder, a real dump and chase type of guy. Ended up in the Flyers for some reason. Ended up signing with the Islanders. 9 games played, 1 goal, 1 assist, 2 points. Played 129 games for Bridgeport and had 107 points. Like, that's insane. You talk about being a quadruple A player. Andy Andrioff might be the most quadruple A player of all time. But when he got called up to the NHL, it never really worked out that way that much. But the reason I picked him for this, to represent this modern era, is because he was part of an infamous roster of Islanders who played the first game at UBS Arena. A loss to the Calgary Flames. I believe it was a 2-0 loss to the Calgary Flames. And that roster was almost entirely made up of dudes from Bridgeport. That Richard Panik, I think, was on that team. Yep. Grant Hutton, I'm sure, was there. Paul Ledoux. Yeah. Because the team was either hurt or they had COVID. And we've said this 100 times. When these guys paid $1 billion for this arena, they could not have possibly envisioned that their opening night there, that they waited all this time. I mean, it took them 2 years or whatever to build the arena, that their opening night there would be just what it was, which was an unfortunately COVID pockmarked, made up roster of, minor leaguers getting shut out by the Calgary Flames. It might have been 2-1 or something. I don't even know, but it was not a fun game to watch. And they ended up losing, I think, what was it, the first 4 games they played there. And so Andy Andrioff, to me, is a guy who represents this era in the sense that, like, he was a veteran. They brought him in for, veteran presence. He ended up playing really well in Bridgeport. They called him up. He couldn't really do much. And, he played in a really tough spot, but at least he got to play at UBS Arena. So that's not too bad. But anyway, I don't think he's going to get an episode all of his own. So whatever memories you have of Andy Andrioff, I'd love to hear right now, because I feel like this is probably the first and last time we're ever going to talk about this guy in this show.
Yes, he's in a weird way represents, and I shouldn't say that. In a weird way, I hate him because, and it's not because of him personally or the player he was, but because of what he said, like what he represents. It's like the bad luck, the hockey gods just absolutely cursing the Islanders, and you for some, when I think about that, Andy Andrioff and Richard Panik's names always come to mind, because you can't, if people think that we are woe is me, and we are hyperbolic about, especially me, about like the Islanders being cursed by the hockey gods. I get that, but at the same time, you and me and Islander fans of a certain vintage, most of us, lived through this team almost being relocated, and the Canadian media especially trying to relocate this team over and over and over again because they weren't on stable ground in Nassau Coliseum. Then they go to Brooklyn and it's a mess, and the mess just kind of continues. They finally get their building. They finally are home. I can go to bed at night knowing the Islanders are going to be there in the morning. And who is there waiting for me in the morning but freaking Andy Andrioff and Paul LeDoux. And they finally get this building, and this is the price that we had to pay. Is like game one is this roster. It's just, you can't make it up stuff. And Andy Andrioff like represents that to me. Like the Islanders, if Andy Andrioff is in the lineup, it means the Islanders don't have depth, which was true. They don't have organizational depth, and they're being cursed by injuries. And that's unfair for him to represent that to me in my head personally, but that's just what it is. So that's Andy Andrioff to me. It just makes me mad.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, him being a guy who had a whole history beforehand gives him the edge in the situation over another guy who I think about on that roster that year. Otto Koivula was another guy who played in that first game, but Otto, was a draft pick of the Islanders, so couldn't really do that. Okay, so my team, to recap: Al Montoya, Ken Sutton, John Erskine, and then up front, Travis Zajac, Josh Ho-Sang, Andy Andrioff. Against your team, Zajac again, Jason Weimer, Keith Aucoin, Tom Pody, Sven Butenschon, Dwayne Rollison. So we will end this. These are two great teams, by the way. I will end this with 2 questions. One, and I'm going to put you on the spot right now. We've had a few weird Islanders coaches. Now, coaches, they generally don't get fired in, less than a season. But we've had a few guys that were around for, let's say, a season and a half, season and change. If you had to pick a weird Islanders coach to coach your squad, who would it be?
Oh, there's no question. In my estimation, that this man is the most anonymous NHL head coach of all time. Steve Sterling.
That's right.
And I know he lasted more than a season, but not much more. But Steve Sterling was the head coach for a full season. The Islanders made the playoffs under him. He was the guy who replaced Laviolette, which was a weird departure. Once again, you just don't really understand the full story there.
Right.
We'll never know because of the way the sport was covered back then. Just one day, Peter Laviolette was not the coach of the Islanders, and Steve Sterling comes in, and so he's the most unremarkable NHL coach of all time. And you did put me up on the spot. I want to look up his overall record here because
I have it right here.
Okay. Was he your coach too?
No, he was not, but I'll get to it in a second. But
because I want to guess. So can you tell me how many games he coached?
Sterling?
Total, yeah.
124 games with the Islanders.
Okay, I'm going to guess he probably won 68 or so.
You're pretty close. He went 56, 51, and 11.
Okay,
So
yeah, so there were ties.
520.
There were ties in his first season. So
Yes.
we'll give him the ties as wins. So 67. Yeah, so like it wasn't like a terrible record at all.
No.
Especially that first season he had them playing pretty well. I mean, they really
Yeah.
crashed out in that playoff series, but he just was like I really have no idea how Steve Sterling
Yeah.
just kind of he just was the Islanders head coach and then essentially disappeared. I think he did a little tour in Europe and that was about it. So
Yeah.
yeah.
The other thing about Sterling is that, we're kind of used to NHL coaches kind of having a predetermined path, right? They start young. These guys usually start like in their mid 30s, probably after a stint in the AHL for a while. They come up, they get a shot. Maybe it doesn't last too long. They get fired. They might resurface again later on after another stint in the AHL or Europe. A little closer to 40 now, maybe on the other side of 40. And all of a sudden they've learned to be a better coach. They get more results. And you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. Steve Sterling's one and only NHL coaching job came when he was 54 years old.
Right.
which is really old. And I'm not making fun of him because he's old, but that's just very unusual for the NHL.
And he was an interim too. He was not he was like their permanent head coach.
Yeah. He had Coach Bridgeport. He was their coach now, but like all of a sudden, your team is hiring a new coach. A lot of times they're looking for somebody younger, or obviously, there are like the retreads. I mean, Barry Trotz was probably in his 50s when he started with the Islanders too, but like he had been coaching for 25 years before that. So it kind of makes sense. This was just literally, and again, I say this with all due respect, just an old man standing behind the bench of the New York Islanders. Just one day he just showed up there. And it was so weird. It was almost like, is he somebody's dad? Like what's going on right now? No, he's the coach. He's the head coach. He didn't have that sort of like, he wasn't the taskmaster type. He wasn't like the, put your hand on the guy's shoulders and be like, it's going to be okay, man. Like, wasn't that. So he didn't really have sort of this defined air about him. And he showed up in his mid 50s. So kind of, that's what I think makes him seem so innocuous. That's so like, where did this guy come from? It's kind of crazy.
Right.
But I'm not surprised you went with him. Again, it's just a fascinating figure. But it's funny that you mentioned him because my pick for my team is the guy, an even more anonymous head coach for the Islanders, and the man who succeeded Sterling when he was let go halfway through the 05-06 season, and that was Brad Shaw.
Yes.
Brad Shaw coached them for 40 games. It went 18-18 in 40 games. He had overtime losses, so for 18-18-4. Sorry, and it was obviously 500. They finished in fourth place, and I just remember at the time them playing pretty well. Like they hadn't really that season was not good for them. And when Shaw took over, I thought they played pretty well. And there was a guy, this was when I was working at the AP. There was a guy I worked with named Jerome who, when the season was over and, we were like, okay, fine. Thank God that season is over. We were talking about who they should get as coach. And Jerome was adamant that it should be Brad Shaw. Like there's no reason why they should give rid of Shaw. They played really well under him. And I was like, you know what? Why not Brad Shaw? But they ended up getting Ted Nolan afterwards, and I couldn't complain. I liked having Ted Nolan there. But Brad Shaw, also currently an assistant coach for the Flyers. So every time he shows up, I just remember to myself, am I the only person that remembers that this man was the head coach of the New York Islanders for 40 games in the early 2000s? I mean, obviously I'm not. You remember too, but I just thought it was kind of funny that this guy, he never really got. I thought I thought he had coached someplace else too, but he was with Columbus, I think, for a while, and I thought he had been an interim someplace else, but I guess not. But right now, that's it. 40 games with the Islanders, 18-18-4. And I would have went with that. So I don't know. I mean, you sound like you remember when Shaw took over that season.
Yeah, I was at his first home game at the Coliseum. You remember they used to have that Blue Line Bar and Grill on the lower level, and they do like the radio post game show, and they'd bring someone out. I remember Shaw came out for like his interview as like the guest for that spot on the radio, and they did it live and. Being like, oh, this guy's great. Like he's going to lead us on a run to the playoffs here. This is great. Obviously that didn't happen. And now every time I hear his name, because his name comes up quite a bit because he's been around now as an assistant for a long time. He gets a lot of credit. I think he's John Tortorella's guy. Like, he's like, that's what he's developed into.
That's why I feel like he was with Columbus too.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
And, anytime his name comes up now, I just laugh thinking about that season, how he because it's never mentioned. Because you won't hear his name as like a candidate, but it was his name will like. Oh, I wonder if Bradshaw will get an interview with this team because they like him and he was there for a long time. And and he's also known as like a defensive guru, a guy who develops defensemen well or whatever. And but anytime his name is mentioned, nobody ever says like, "Oh, he's got previous head coaching experience." And with the Islanders, because the Islanders just did not exist for some seasons back then.
Basically,
so, yeah. Bradshaw is a good coach for this team.
I think so. Okay,
he'll work wonders with Ken Sutton. And
well, that's a perfect segue. So we thank you all for listening. This has been a lot of fun. Again, we'll get back to our great guests later on. We've already got a bunch in the can. We're just kind of doling them out over the course of the season. But here's where the audience participation part comes in. Okay, so you've heard the teams. Mike's team Lieboff, Zajac, Weimer, Keith Aucoin, Tom Pody, Sven Butenshan, Dwayne Rolison, coached by Steve Sterling. Then you got Team Saraceni, Zajac. Again, let's pretend that there's two Travis Zajacs in this universe. Josh Hosang, Andy Andrioff, Ken Sutton, John Erskine, Al Montoya, coached by Brad Shaw. Let us know either, in DMs, on social media, at the Patreon, wherever. Let us know which of these teams you think wins a head-to-head matchup. And if your answer is it's probably a 0-0 tie, you know what? I think you're probably right. You're probably on the right track. I don't know. Who do you think would win in this scenario?
The only thing I know is that Weimer versus Erskine would be an epic fight.
I mean, I'm just looking at these teams. The only guy with even a touch of offensive talent is Hosang, and he scored 7 goals for the Islanders. I don't know. Yeah, the defense sort of cancels itself out. Rolison versus Montoya is probably pretty close. But yeah, imagine Andy Andrioff lining up against Keith Aucoin. Wow, how about that? And obviously Travis Zajac against Travis Zajac is a huge matchup. So interesting. But I think as two weird Islanders quarter-century teams, I think we did pretty well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay. Thank you again for listening. Become a member at patreon.com/IslandersAnxiety for ad-free episodes and bonus content, or you could just join for free and get announcements and our weekly release calendar. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible.com, iHeartRadio, everywhere, and leave us a review where you can. Our theme song is Knuckles by Bjorn Falk. Listen to more of Bjorn's music on Bandcamp and on Spotify. Read Lighthouse Hockey every single day for your most up-to-date Islanders news and discussion. Islanders Anxiety Podcast are part of these fans for a sports network. Shop VintageIceHockey.com. Try wines from the Pinot Project. Mike, where can everybody find you on Twitter?
The Big Lebowski with 2 E's.
Follow Mike at the Big Lebowski. Any final thoughts on the quarter century of Islanders hockey? Weird or not so weird? I mean, even the regular guys are kind of weird in a way, but the weird ones, I think, are the ones that we kind of gravitate to the most.
No, I'm just very happy to get these guys on a team. So yeah, it was really. I mean, we could have filled out a roster of 20 skaters, 3 healthy scratches, and a coaching staff, but that'll be for another day.
Definitely. Oh yeah, we could redo this again too. We could do this in another 25 years when they do their half century team. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with another weird Islander and a great guest. And until then, keep the Islanders weird. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.